Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode number 27 of The Police and the People, and our first ever video recorded version of it using Zoom.
Yeah,
So,
number 27, huh?
yeah. So now we're going to try to, you know, take the turn here and move into video elements because we
Yeah,
now have a YouTube channel for
yeah.
GSPTC. So here we go. All right. So with today's episode, we're going to be talking about the Brionna Taylor incident. We're going to give you a little bit of a rundown on what actually happened, talk a little bit about tactics and policies these days, and also we're going to talk about no-knock warrants. What are they? Why do they exist? Etc. What the police have to prove to get those. And then last, we're going to end with a question, which is, what was our favorite position or rank during our career?
Yeah,
All
right.
right.
Yeah,
So yeah, we were just talking about that a little bit before we started recording, but
sure.
we'll get to that in just a minute. So before we keep going, be sure to support us on Patreon, everyone. We'd really appreciate it. We need to get a little income to help pay for this podcast, and as we grow, we certainly want to be able to afford engineering costs and things of that nature because I stink at it. So I would like to hire a professional to do it. So just like $5 a month is all we're asking. So if you could just pledge that much, we'd greatly appreciate it. That's at patreon.com/the police and the people. And also, as many of you know who listen, and for those who don't, Josh and I are owners of Granite State Police Career Counseling, which is a law enforcement training company based out of New Hampshire. And COVID kicked us into you-know-what. So it really did, but it did force us to create an online platform. So if you go to our website, gs-pcc.com, again, gs-pcc.com, you can see what we offer for training for in-class sessions and also for online sessions. Now, our online library is still relatively small. We only have 6 classes because we just created it. And but we have some good stuff there. Even one of the classes is free. And but we do have some good stuff coming up, right, Josh?
Yeah, we have some excellent
For
classes coming
October
up.
and November and December, right?
Yep, we have, well, October is just about full, but we do have one class that has some room in it, and that is instructor development. That class is in Hampton, New Hampshire. It's a
Yep.
2-day class. It's going to be taught by Phil White, who has become a little bit of a GSPCC celebrity here.
Yeah,
He's
he
been
has.
on, he's been on the podcast. He's been in some of the promotional videos, and now police officers around New England are starting to kind of learn about Phil White from California, who does some training for us. So that class is going towards the end of October. And then in November, we have a class that is digital forensics and social media investigations.
Mm-hmm.
That class is going to be up in Topsham, Maine. That's a great class. And the officers that take that class will actually be working with some devices and learning how to secure evidence off of those devices.
Yep.
And then when we get into December, we have leadership development in Newington, New Hampshire, and that's a 3-day class, and that's one of our most popular classes.
Yeah.
Last but not least, yeah, it's a great class. And then last but not least, we have patrol skill build that is scheduled that's in November as well, in Hooksett, New Hampshire, and there is still some room in that class. Unfortunately, all of our other classes are full. We have 3 or 4 others that are going in 2020 that are full. So as you said, COVID was certainly an issue for us, but now I think what we're seeing is officers are signing up in bulk for training because everybody had to hit the pause button there in March and April, May of last year. Yep.
All right.
So go right to the website and you can
Yep.
sign up for any of those classes.
You can see the dates and times and register right there. If you want to pay by check, you can still register via the website, or if you want to pay by credit card. Either way, it gives you a choice. All right. So enough of the business there. So let's talk about Brionna Taylor.
Yeah.
All right. So what actually happened? You have that, Josh?
Well, we know that the police department in Louisville was serving a drug warrant, right? And this was part of a long-term investigation. And as a result of that investigation, they had applied for a no-knock warrant. And when they went to serve the warrant, unfortunately, they were met with resistance, right? And
Correct.
an officer was fired upon and was actually struck by a male party that was inside of the residence where they were serving the warrant. And that
Right.
residence was where Brionna Taylor lived as well.
Yes.
So there ended up being an exchange of gunfire between the police and the male party that was inside. And as a result, Brionna Taylor was killed by police gunfire. And again, a police officer was shot in that exchange as well.
Yes.
So this obviously caused a huge issue in our communities and in our society, especially because of the current climate that police and communities are experiencing right now, and even more so the communities of color being concerned with the interactions between police and people of color. So that, to me, that's really the crux of it. I mean, we can talk more about the details of this, but that seems to be the crux of the concerns with the incident, and the death of Brionna Taylor.
Yeah, absolutely. So first, before we go into that, let's talk about some things that were claimed to be true, but
Sure.
when the reports came out, it turns out that they were not true. So let's make sure we kind of clear the air on that, and then I'd really like to have a discussion about policy moving forward.
Yeah. Yep.
Not that anything was done incorrectly. However, when these things do happen, you have to take a step back and go, should we have gone in the first place? You know, and that's not a knock on the police officers. Unfortunately, sometimes our biggest lessons learned are at the end of tragic events.
Yes.
Unfortunately.
Absolutely.
So there was a claim that the officers failed to properly announce themselves.
Sure.
So this goes back to knock versus no knock warrants.
Mm-hmm.
From what I understand in the research that I did, they did not have a no knock warrant. In other words, they had to announce before they went in, before they breached a door. All right.
Yeah, and that's kind of gone back and forth. I mean, we hear reports that it was a no knock warrant, then we hear reports that it was a knock and announce warrant, and that's obviously the subject of a lot of the criticism of the actions of the police. Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
right here, the warrant for Taylor's home was secured as a no knock warrant. Which allows police to enter a home without announcing themselves. Mattingly said in his recorded statement to investigators, however, that he and his team were told to knock on the door and announce themselves.
Right.
So what that tells me is it was probably a salty police officer, probably a lieutenant or something, who looked at this and said, let's not do a no knock. Let's announce. All right.
Right.
And there's pros and cons to both of that, but and we'll get into that when we talk about policy. So according to what the officer said, and according to a witness in a different apartment, they heard the police announce themselves, bang the door, and announce police. Okay.
Right.
All right. So there's that one. And then there was a claim that Taylor was asleep in her bed when she was struck by a bullet, and that is not true.
Right.
That has been found to be false. She was actually standing right next to her boyfriend, who's the one that shot the police officer. So when they returned fire, she was right in the line of fire.
Right.
So she was not in her bed. And again, we're going to talk more about policy stuff in a minute. So that was false. That officers arrested their actual target hours before Taylor was shot. It turns out that was uncertain. That the target was arrested, but not at that apartment. But the target had listed where she lives as her address,
as a residence,
or had his residence, which is why the police were there. All right. So, and there's no indication that Taylor was involved with drug sales, but her former boyfriend who lived there and listed that place as an address was. That was what they were investigating.
And we've heard from the more, I guess, conservative side that has maybe suggested that Brionna Taylor had some involvement in the drug trade. And from what I have researched, that has been debunked. So, you have to make it clear, and this is a person that can't defend themselves at this point in the media or in the press. It does not appear that Brionna Taylor, from everything we've gathered, had any activity with the drug trade.
Correct.
I don't know
There's no
if
indication
you've
of
read
that.
anything else.
No,
Right.
no. And that the police entered the wrong apartment. That's another one that's kind of floating out there, but that's not true. They entered
Right.
correct address,
Right.
because that does happen. That police
Absolutely.
go in the wrong place, especially when it comes to apartments.
Yep.
Because sometimes they're confusing because they all kind of look the same. So I just wanted to put some of those to rest before we continued on. So now moving on to policy. I think this incident does allow us to ask the question, should they have even gone in at all, right? And the reason I say that is because right before I retired, the regional SWAT team that my agency was part of had created a policy that they were no longer going to do entries for drug warrants. They weren't going to be hitting the doors and throwing in flashbangs and going in to make it safe. They were going to surround and call out. And they made that clear to all detective divisions, because it's usually the detectives that are running these drug investigations. And when they set up to do the search, if they feel it's unsafe, they'll have a SWAT team come in first and make the house safe. And they do that by kicking in the door and throwing flashbangs and going in. I know I used to do that. However, the command staff for the regional team decided that they weren't going to do that anymore. And the reason was safety for the officers and safety for people inside. So now this begs the question, and I am not Monday morning quarterbacking this, but maybe a better policy is to surround and call out. Of course, the downside is what?
Well, you have people
Evidence,
that
right?
they're either able to destroy evidence, or if people come out and now they're engaging the police, out in the public, now maybe you've lost some of that control that you have inside of a building.
Right.
So, it is a calculated decision that police officers have to make. And I would argue that there's no right decision and there's no wrong decision.
Right.
You have to look at them on a case by case basis.
You do.
You have to look at them on a case by case basis. And as you know, and I was a member of a SWAT team, not as a tactical officer, as a hostage negotiator. Many tactical teams have almost like a matrix that they use, right? And they start saying, prior contacts with the people. If there have been violent prior contacts, there's a check in that box.
No weapons, all of that,
Right. And at the end of it, you add up all of your numbers, and if it reaches a certain number on a threat matrix, we'll call it, then that's how you make some of your decisions. It's not a perfect approach, but it's something, right? You have to have some approach. You can't just kind of spit in the wind and say, oh, let's just see what happens. Because when you do that, that's when you have these tragedies, I think. So in that sense, I will Monday morning quarterback, not the folks in Louisville, but police officers in general. If you don't plan these incidents correctly, and if you don't prepare for these incidents correctly, that's where you're going to have tragedies. And so it's all in the preparation to me.
Yeah. So another thing, though, I remember when I went through SWAT school, and the main guy that was heading that up, I don't recall his name right now, but he was one of the original members of LA SWAT. And he pointed out that if you're going to be an operator for a SWAT team, you have to know surgical shooting. And that's what he called it, precision surgical shooting. And you don't pull a trigger unless you are certain of your target. So just to Monday morning quarterback a little bit here, I was wondering if this was just shot was fired at them, and in response, just a hail of bullets went out instead of really verifying the target and taking the shot. I don't know the answer to that, but just something to consider.
Yeah, and And I think that's probably something that is unfortunately very common with police officers. You know, you were a police officer, I was a police officer. When you have bullets coming at you, your first instinct is to fire back, right? And it's not the wrong instinct. You have to defend yourself. But similar to that comment that you heard, I can remember a firearms officer saying on the range, "You own every bullet that comes out of this gun."
Yeah.
And so you have to understand, you know, you have to target acquisition and understanding the background, you know, what's going on behind your target, and so on and so forth. And again, I'm not Monday morning quarterbacking because I wasn't there, but I can understand how the first instinct is to return fire. And I can also understand the need for police officers, including you and I when we worked, to own every bullet that comes out of our gun. But understand these were not tactical officers, to my understanding. These were narcotics investigators, which goes back to when you're serving a warrant that maybe was a no-knock warrant or that got modified at some point. Do you start to say to yourself, let's have a tactical team do this? Because a tactical team has more experience with that surgical shooting that you were talking about. You know, we're just, you know, for all of our listeners, we're just talking about ideas here. We're not, you know, we're not giving absolutes, but that to me is part of the success or failure of these operations, is to start talking about what could happen. And if it does, what can we do to be prepared for that? And one thing, again, I'm a big fan of tactical teams. You use them. They're there for a reason, and they have a skill set that other police officers don't always have.
And if your drug units are going to be doing these tactical entries, they need to be trained. They need to be trained on how to do this. Like the first person through the door, in my opinion, should have a shield.
Right.
The first person in this one, that bullet may not have hit the officer's leg. Right. So, because it was with a handgun. I know that shields are limited, that, you know, rifles will piss right through them. I know that. But, you know, it's better than nothing.
You're cutting down your percentages now. You're saying, okay, we've got a shield. So unless it's a high powered rifle, we have, you know, a better chance of being successful here.
Right.
There's, again, you just want to have, as police officers, you want to have every advantage so that you can end these incidents safely for the officers involved, safely for the suspects, safely for the people that are living in the apartments around or the homes around that area too. So that, you know, you want to take all of those factors into account.
Yeah. So for our civilians that are listening to our podcasts, and we're very thankful that you are listening, because that's what this whole podcast is about. It's called The Police and the People, and that we just want to give you information and perspective from the police side. And we also bring in civilians sometimes to get their side of it as well. But for the civilians that are listening, we just want to also explain what exactly is a no-knock warrant and what is a knock warrant and why do they exist. So typically, you want to announce yourself when you go to someone's home and you have a warrant to search it, right? Or even if you have an arrest warrant for someone there, you want to make your presence known. You want them to know it's the police. Now, in the whole drug world, no-knock warrants were developed because what they were finding was that people were destroying evidence. So you're knocking on the door, police, open up, police, open up. Meanwhile, they're, you know, you can hear the toilets flushing, right? So the big thing is that it destroys evidence. Also, no-knock warrants are good for dangerous people. So if you're going to hit someone's house at 2 a.m., when you know that they're probably asleep, you don't want to wake them up by knocking. You want to get in that house quickly and basically get in their OODA loop, right? Get inside that OODA loop so they can't respond. So you've just made them 100% useless. And we used to do that. You know, when you throw in a concussion grenade and at 2 a.m. and all of a sudden there's 10 guys, you know, in that house flooding it, there's not much you can do but just give up, right?
Dominate the incident was a
Exactly.
term
Yep.
that I heard, that
Yep.
I always used to hear. We're going to go in and we're going to dominate the room.
Exactly. You do. And you
Yep.
go in as fast as, you can comfortably shoot, but with a swiftness and saturate the house. So um, those are those were some of the reasons that no-knock warrants were developed. All right. Now, I think in New Hampshire, I think they prefer. So when I get a search warrant in New Hampshire, it's assumed that it's going to be a knock warrant. In order for me to have that label as no knock, I have to prove to the judge that's signing it that I need to not knock, right? That there are certain reasons behind it. So you have to prove it. I'm assuming most states are like that as well. It's not like just a given assumption that it's a no knock. You actually have to take it to the next level and prove it. So at least that's been my experience with them in the past. Just a quick story. We did a hit on a guy one time. He was a dangerous dude and he was wanted. He was staying at a no-tell motel, and I was part of the entry team. And the flashbang went in through a window off the back of the motel room that went into a bathroom. Right? They just broke the window and threw the grenade in. As soon as it went off, we went in the front door. But the flashbang fell into a pair of his girlfriend's underwear, let's just say, and it caught on fire. So we're going into a room that's full of smoke, and there's the fire alarms going off, and we got these two naked people because we caught them doing you know what. And but we definitely saturated that.
Yeah.
if he wanted to do anything, it was just to get the hell out of there because the room was on fire that we caused.
Yep. And that's why I guess what we're talking about, anything that can go wrong will go wrong. So you need to prepare for all of those things to go wrong.
Yeah.
And even after you prepare, there's always going to be something that you didn't prepare for. But to just simply say, well, we're going to go knock on a door or we're going to go kick a door in and everything will be fine.
Mhm.
That is, that old saying, failing to prepare is preparing to fail.
Yeah.
And the problem is, once you prepare and half a dozen times nothing happens, it becomes very, very easy to start to let your guard down. And that's just human nature. Right.
Yeah.
That's human nature, and police officers are human. And so what ends up happening is, once you prepare properly a bunch of times and nothing happens, and then you kind of take it half speed a few times and you get lucky and nothing happens, you just kind of feel like, well, nothing ever happens. It's foolish for us to spend all of this time preparing, and then sooner or later it gets you. You may get away with it once, twice, you may get away with it 100 times, but the more times that you roll the dice, sooner or later it will get you, and somebody will get hurt, or God forbid, somebody will get killed. And that's the unfortunate thing, because police officers are humans.
They are humans. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So let's move on to now the decision from the AG's office in Kentucky to not indict the officers for, I'm not sure what they were seeking. I know they were
seeking an indictment.
But for what? For murder charge?
There were several. There was, I don't have it right in front of me, but there were multiple charges that they were seeking indictment, and they only got one, and that was for almost, in our words, reckless. In New Hampshire, recklessness is really maybe the best layman's term for it, is a recklessness of one of the officers.
Because he was sounds like he was just blindly shooting, and some of the rounds went into neighboring apartments.
Right. Yep.
Again, apartments. Get SWAT teams because they know what they're doing, and they also, a lot of them carry specific rounds that they don't want penetrating walls. Like the shotguns, you have tactical slugs that aren't as powerful, right?
Right in the word, very sluggish, a very sluggish round. It'll stop something, but it doesn't. It's not a high-powered round that'll go right. It's not like a
slug for hunting, right? And there's also tap rounds for 223 rounds that are made to make them break up as soon as they hit things. So, so anyway, that's one officer was indicted for that wanton recklessness that he was charged with. He was also fired.
Right. And that was even before the indictment, I believe,
Correct. Yeah, he was
that he was
fired in June.
terminated.
Yeah, he was fired in June. Yeah, because of the recklessness. And I don't know if there's an internal fight with that, but he probably will not get his job back if I were a gambling
Yeah,
person.
very, very difficult to be effective as a police officer after an incident like this, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah. And I know he was laying down, fire because one of the three guys was shot.
Right.
So it's
Yep.
instinctive to want to just fire back and suppress everything so you can get your guy out of there. But you got to remember, this isn't the military. You're not in Afghanistan. Sometimes these are paper thin walls in these apartment complexes, and those rounds can hit other people, and they have.
Yep.
So anyway, the AG decided not to indict the other officers, to include the one that fired the shot that killed Brionna. And I actually have, I'll show you a quick, like 7-minute video.
Protests are still ongoing in Louisville, Kentucky after the grand jury verdict in the Brionna Taylor case last month. Back in March, Brionna Taylor's boyfriend opened fire on police after they announced a search warrant at night and entered her apartment. The grand jury indicted one officer in that. The indictment accused him of endangering others for returning fire. A police officer had been shot when he did that. After that verdict came down, a BLM sympathizer apparently shot 2 police officers in Louisville. One of those officers, Major Aubrey Gregory, called for calm on Wednesday, saying, quote, "Hate and violence progresses nothing." That's demonstrably true. But BLM's leaders and the news media apparently disagree with that message. They've decided to claim that the Attorney General of Kentucky, Daniel Cameron, has somehow betrayed the black community. Kind of a shocking accusation, but they said it. The Attorney General is about to respond on this show in just a moment. But first, hear what those attacks against him looked like.
Don't look at the fact that this guy's black. That does not mean anything. He is a Republican through and through. He spoke at the RNC. He told you who he was. Believe him. At least
he's skin folk, but he is not kinfolk. And so just like he thinks they can't speak for Kentucky because he's up there with a black face, he does not speak for all of us.
I think what I saw this morning was a Bull Connor speech in 2020. And you're right. Unfortunately, it was being given by a black prosecutor.
I'm so disgusted by this. I'm so disgusted by Daniel Cameron's performance. I am so sick and tired of black people going on the air and performing for violence and white supremacy and state-sponsored violence against black people and claiming they're mamas and claiming they're because of black men, they care about it.
Those attacks are so cruel and so vicious and unfair that we hesitated to air them again, and we didn't want to play them right before introducing the Attorney General of Kentucky, Daniel Cameron. But he asked us to because he wants to respond. Of course, he saw them as well. We're happy to have him on tonight. Mr. Attorney General, thanks so much for joining us. Again, I'm embarrassed even to play that before this interview, but I have to ask you, what did you think when you saw that?
Well, look, Tucker, it is so unfortunate that because I have a different political philosophy and because in my role as the Attorney General and as the special prosecutor in the Brionna Taylor investigation, because I led with the facts and the truth and had that lead to the conclusion, somehow I've betrayed my race. It is repugnant. It is so disappointing, but it's par for the course. Anytime someone stands for the truth, and when that truth is different from a narrative that has been pushed by others, this is how they respond. And if you look at my social media, you'll see countless folks who have made similar statements and comments. But I'm here tonight to say that enough is enough, and that black Republicans, folks that believe in the truth, that we're going to stand up. And that's what I did in presenting all of the information to the grand jury in the Brionna Taylor investigation. That's what I'm charged to do. That is my responsibility as the Attorney General of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. That's what the citizens here of all 120 counties deserve. And that's what they elected me to do.
Well, God bless you for your calm and for your bravery. I don't think I could handle it if I were you. But I'm glad that you can. So, since you're here, and we've covered this case quite a bit, there's been a lot of competing stories about what actually happened. Clear up for us, if you would, since no one was more intimately involved in this than you. What misinformation is out there about the Brionna Taylor case?
Well, the biggest myth that is being promoted right now is the idea that Sergeant Mattingly, one of the officers who was administering the search warrant in the morning hours at Brionna Taylor's apartment, was shot by friendly fire, meaning shot by another officer. Look, I've taken to calling this a conspiracy theory. In order to believe this narrative that's being promoted by a defense attorney in Louisville, Kentucky, you have to believe, one, to defy physics and disregard the trajectory analysis, but you have to believe that the officer that was standing outside of the apartment shooting into the apartment, that he had a magic bullet, and that bullet went through the apartment unit and then made a sharp turn left without any obstruction or any impediment to match it up with the entry point of the wound that Sergeant Mattingly suffered. It is a silly notion. It's one of the biggest myths that has been promoted here in the last few weeks. Before 3 weeks ago and before this defense attorney uttered this statement, it was a foregone conclusion that what happened that evening was that Kenny Walker, Brionna Taylor's boyfriend, fired a shot at the officers. The officers responded and returned fire, justified in doing so because they had been fired upon. And the tragedy, and again, I've said this from the very beginning, the tragedy here is that Brionna Taylor was in that hallway as well and was hit.
Yes.
But the tragedy doesn't allow for me to not present the facts and the truth, and that's what we've done here.
Amen. And that's, as an outsider, that was exactly my read on it. It looked like a tragedy. Everyone is sad that she died, but it doesn't seem like it justifies violence in the streets. You said that as well. You said it's not justice for the mob to commit violence, and you were attacked for saying that. What do you make of the response?
Well, again, there were a lot of people inside and outside, a lot of celebrities, a lot of folks that were either misrepresented the facts because it was to their advantage or didn't know all the information. They made conclusions first and then want to cherry pick the facts to meet those conclusions. I don't have that luxury as the Attorney General here in the Commonwealth. My responsibility is to the truth and to the information, and then that is ultimately what leads to the conclusion. We presented all of the information to the grand jury. Ultimately, we presented to them as well the fact that the officers, Mattingly and Cosgrove, were fired upon, and they were justified in returning their fire. We've obviously have a prosecution into a third officer that was there that night. I can't get into the specifics because that is an ongoing prosecution. But again, a lot of folks had already made up their mind and weren't interested in what the truth is, and now are still trying to cherry pick so that they can fashion a narrative that meets their agenda and advances their own interests.
Man, I hope someday we can have dinner, and I'm going to ask you what you think of the many other prosecutors who've bowed to political pressure, but I'm not going to ask you that on TV because it'd be putting you in a bad spot. In the meantime,
well, I'm going to take you up on that dinner.
I hope so.
Yes,
Daniel Cameron, Attorney General of the Commonwealth of Kentucky, thanks so much.
All right, so that was the AG that decided. Well, he didn't decide. It was actually the grand jury. It just didn't indict.
Right.
So, just so everyone understands that, a grand jury is made up of 24 or 25.
It really depends because, sometimes you have members of a grand jury that have to recuse themselves for various reasons too.
Right, yeah.
So when you get a grand jury pool, you usually have many people, and then at times you have to remove people for various reasons.
Right.
But it's a large group of people. In
Yep.
New Hampshire, like you said, you might walk into a grand jury room and there's 25, 26, 27 people in that room.
Yeah, I used to have to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, and then they return what they call a true bill in most states, where basically the grand jury looks at the circumstances and determines, okay, is there enough information or enough evidence here that we feel the case should be heard by a judge or a jury? And so then they bind that case over for, in New Hampshire, it would be Superior Court.
Exactly. Yeah.
So if a grand jury doesn't indict, if they determine, there isn't enough evidence here to support that charge, then they do not return what's called in New Hampshire a true bill.
Right. And just so to kind of break it down for our non-police people that are listening. So when you go into a grand jury, right? So you have had a case, right? And let's say you have a charge on someone, and in most states, grand juries are brought together for felony cases. They don't necessarily do it for misdemeanors. All right, maybe in special occasions. So you're looking at a felony charge here. Now, maybe you've worked a case and you've got probable cause that this person committed this crime. You go before a magistrate with your arrest warrant, and the judge says, yep, I've read it. You definitely have probable cause. They sign it authorizing the arrest of that person. But in a lot of states now, because it's a felony, you have to also indict them. So it's a nice mechanism. It's a nice double mechanism there to make sure that probable cause is even met. And I'm not sure how it is in other states, but in New Hampshire, if it happens at the local level, then even if they're charged with a felony that's going to be moving on to a different prosecutor, a higher level prosecutor, they can even fight the case at a probable cause hearing at the district level. So there's all these different ways that they can, basically attack your investigation to make sure a probable cause exists. The judge is going to make sure they could have a probable cause hearing before it moves on. And then there's the indictment process. And all of these mechanisms make sure that you have probable cause, that it's more likely than not this person committed this crime. So typically, whenever you're in front of a grand jury, you've gone through this filter process already. So most of the time, you're going to get a true bill, unless you're just really bad, right? Unless your case is just absolutely horrible.
Right.
So, but it shouldn't have made it through the filter process in the beginning, if that's the case.
So if I could just comment on that, Tim, and then on the flip side of it, so again, you mentioned, multiple steps. There are some cases, and this being one of them, it sounds like, where you say, we're not going to seek an arrest warrant. We're going to go right to the grand jury step and have the case kind of vetted and reviewed. And that happens quite often in New Hampshire. And as you said, there was a time when a probable cause hearing might be held after an arrest. And a lot of states, it's my understanding, and in New Hampshire, we got rid of that probable cause hearing it must have been about 2 years ago, the last year or two of my career, where cases that were, if a case was an arrest on a felony charge, it went through what they called the felonies first portal and was kind of rocket rided right to the superior court level. And that's just a more efficient way of getting these cases in front of a superior court judge. But if you have a case that is very sensitive, that maybe needs to be reviewed by somebody other than the police, then you can go right to the grand jury step, which is what I think they did here. And it's kind of an easy way for a prosecutor's office to say, we're going to put this case in front of the grand jury and let a group of people review the facts and circumstances and decide if people did something wrong, if there was made an error in law, what were the circumstances here?
Right.
So I think that's probably why it went right to the grand jury level in this case.
And the grand jury did the right thing. So I'm sure everyone has noticed this, but when these situations happen where a white police officer shoots a black suspect, it seems like the prosecutors are just so quick to charge. They want to just go right to, first degree murder, right? These hard charges, heavy charges, instead of just waiting until see what the investigation reveals. Because what we're seeing now is this, that these prosecutors get heavy handed, and then the officers don't get charged, or they go to trial and it gets lost.
Sure.
And the officers win because they didn't meet the elements of the crime, which is what happened here in Kentucky. I'm sorry, Josh, I'll let you speak just a minute. I just want to say that was what happened. So they presented possible charges. I think there were a litany of them that they could have possibly gone with, and these were the elements of those. And if you know anything about prosecuting, you have to meet these elements of the crime, right? and they just didn't. You can't put a square peg in a round hole, right?
Right.
You can't just make it up, make it happen. So that's why these officers weren't indicted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've said it on our podcast before. It's very, very dangerous to start casting judgment or making judgment until you have all of the facts, right?
Go figure.
And and it almost goes hand in hand with the Brionna Taylor incident, that if you don't take your time, if you don't prepare properly, if you don't connect all of your dots and make sure that you've done your homework and dot your I's and cross your T's, that's where you have problems.
Right.
And I heard an activist make a comment and say the system worked based on the way the system is set up.
Yeah.
So you can argue that there's a breakdown in the system.
Okay.
That maybe we shouldn't have no-knock warrants, or as you mentioned in your department, maybe we shouldn't be serving high-risk drug warrants, or there's a lot of dialogue there that is really worthwhile to have.
Mm-hmm.
But as that particular activist said, the police were doing police things. They were working within their the parameters of their job. And he said, you can't fault law enforcement for returning fire when they are fired upon. Now, as you pointed out, and I think you pointed out correctly, though, you need to know where the bullets are going. You can't just fire blindly and say, well, somebody's shooting at me, so I'm shooting back.
Right.
No, you're not shooting back. You're just shooting blindly.
Yep.
And unfortunately, that's when people get hurt.
Yep.
The wrong, you shoot unarmed people. So when you start to talk about the lack of indictment, as you pointed out, the prosecutor can only work within the system that he or she is presented. The police can only work within the system that they are presented. The members of the grand jury, the judge, the defense attorneys, they can only work within the system that they are presented.
Right.
So I think there can be some dialogue about the system, but to blame this prosecutor per se, and I've heard a lot of comments about that, I think that's very unfair, and it's very it's ignorant in the sense that you have people that maybe just don't understand the process.
Right, exactly. And they're blaming him, but I mean, it went to a grand jury.
Right.
And they said no. So I mean, that's that. He did his job. He presented some options to them, and they said no.
The one that they chose, people just don't feel that is of enough consequence, right?
I guess
they feel that charge is just not, they feel that there should have been stronger charges, whether it be manslaughter or murder, rather than a reckless charge.
For the officers that actually
were indicted.
The bullet that actually killed her, that officer should be held accountable in some way. Right. But again, it's he didn't get up that morning and say, I'm going to go kill someone today.
Sure.
It's all in response to, a shot being fired at them. So,
Yep.
All right. You ready to move on to the question?
Yeah.
All right.
You want to go first, or you want me to go first?
So the question is, what was your favorite position or rank during your career? So I spent 20 years in law enforcement, had all kinds of positions. And I'll start with saying that my least favorite was the one that I was in the longest, was being a lieutenant. Now, I want to set this up. I'm not saying I hated my job. I'm just saying of all the positions I've been in, like sergeant, patrol sergeant, detective, patrol officer, that was the detective part, the administrative part. The lieutenant administrative part was not my favorite. But of the others, I just truly enjoyed them so much, so thoroughly. And if I had to say of the ones that I did enjoy, probably being a sergeant was one of my favorites, because I grew as a leader. There's a lot I had to learn, and it made me a much better officer. But I enjoyed helping others grow, helping others become better at their jobs. I truly enjoyed that.
Yep.
How about you, man?
I enjoyed being a detective the most. I was a detective for about 6 years, and very similar to you, I was a patrol officer. I was a detective. I was a patrol sergeant. I was ultimately the deputy chief of my department. And being a detective, there was a sense of accomplishment as a detective because you were able to see a case through. I always kind of considered myself a thinking man's cop, so to speak. I enjoyed the strategy